but Wilma is a MacArthur Fellow, those so-called genius grants. She won one of those. She knows what she's talking about. Now, Boone Pickens may be the most famous oilman in the United States. And a few years ago, he said that water will be the oil of the 21st century. And right now, you are in the middle of a recognition of what that means. And I'm here because I was part of the decision-making process. I was on, as some of you know, I imagine, I was on the Southeast Louisiana Flood Protection Authority East, which filed a lawsuit against 97 oil, gas, and pipeline.
Yeah.
And I want to tell you how that relates to you in two ways. I mean, quite directly. First, you live in a coastal, excuse me, you live in a coastal parish. And I, like probably everybody in this room, would love to see some gates at the lake to protect people living around the lake from hurricane storm surge. But before you get the gates at the lake, you need to make sure that the existing, there's a spit of land that sticks out from New Orleans east and goes most of the way across the lake. It's referred to as the land bridge. And that land bridge is disappearing. It's eroding. And one of the reasons the Flood Authority filed the lawsuit is because we recognize that if that land bridge disappears, then you're going to get the entire Gulf of Mexico, without anything to stop it, pouring into the lake, threatening people with hurricane storm surge who never imagined they would ever be threatened by hurricane storm surge. And to keep that spit of land in place will cost, according to a study that the authority did, $1.2 billion for that one project. Forget about that. We're not talking about building the gates of the lake. We're just keeping that current obstacle to storm surge in place. So that directly affects everyone around the lake, and obviously everybody in St. Tammany. The reason the Flood Authority filed the lawsuit is, number one, the industry did the damage to the coast. They are responsible for a significant part of land loss everywhere in the state. They did not cause all of it. They only caused part of it, but they did cause part of it. According to a U.S. Geological Survey study, which included scientists from Exxon, Amoco, Chevron, other industry entities, 36% of the land loss is the responsibility of the oil and gas industry. The industry itself recognizes, its own studies recognize that it did the damage. In fact, the trade association for the major oil companies is Louisiana Mid-Continent Oil and Gas. They did a study of part of the state, and that study, their own study, concluded in that area the, quote, overwhelming cause, unquote, of land loss was industry operations. Now, in other parts of the state, it's a lot less. Sort of depends where you are. So, number one, the industry did the damage. Number two, and this is really the reason we filed the lawsuit, they broke the law when they did it. The industry will tell you that they operated lawfully at the time. That's not true. They never complied with the law. I can show you laws going back to 1920 that governed a lot of the operations that they did and that they did not comply with. Then beginning in the 30s and the 40s, when the offshore drilling got started in a serious way, the permits and regulations became increasingly specific. Going back to 1952, more than 60 years ago, the Corps of Engineers started saying they had to maintain the canals as permitted. They're not supposed to go from 40 feet to 300 feet and cause other damage. They got more specific in 1974, and in 1980, 35 years ago, and all these permits also, all these regulations also required the industry to restore the land when they ceased operations, to fix the damage that they did. Then beginning in 1980, state law began using language like this. This is a direct quote. When the operations cease, the areas are to be, quote, restored as near as practicable to the original condition, unquote. The industry never even attempted to do any of these things. I can show you a list of well over $100 million that taxpayers paid, that you paid, to fix problems that the permits required the industry specifically to fix, sometimes, quote, within 90 days, unquote. But the industry never did a thing. You paid to fix those problems. And that's what the lawsuit is about. The lawsuit is to make the industry obey the law, make the industry comply with their permits, which are contracts, just honor their contracts. The lawsuit is about three things. It's what every parent should be teaching their kids. You keep your word, you obey the law, and you take responsibility for your actions. Now, how it relates to you, I already told you the first way, that land bridge, if you expect to remain safe in St. Tammany, or anywhere else around the lake, you better hope that that land bridge does not erode away. And that somewhere, money has to come forward to make sure that stays in place. And right now, the master plan doesn't have any funding. Right? It has some funding, incredibly insufficient funding. Incredibly insufficient. It's a piece of paper with nothing behind it. But there's also a larger principle at stake. Is the industry accountable? Right now, the legislature of the state of Louisiana is attempting to kill the lawsuit filed by the Flood Authority, to kill a lawsuit that is already in the courts, retroactively go back, a lawsuit that has already won its first court victory. And what they are trying to do is essentially make the industry immune from being forced not to do anything special, just to comply with the law. Just to comply with the law. Just to keep their word. Just to honor the contracts, their permits. Just to do what state law required, but which the Department of Natural Resources never enforced. And it's not an accident that DNR didn't enforce it. You know, DNR has two tasks, regulating the industry and promoting the industry. Well, guess which tasks they spend more time doing? This idea of immunity, if they succeed in the legislature in getting that through, I I guarantee you it affects everything going forward in the state of Louisiana. It affects whether or not industry is going to be accountable to you, accountable to regulators, or whether they're going to go back to the legislature every time they want to get something fixed because someone attempts to hold them accountable. Incidentally, Helis is one of the defendants in the lawsuit that we filed.
That's right.
And there's a basic principle here. Some of you know I'm an historian, so I'll tell you a little bit about history. There's a personal hero of mine. I doubt many people in this room ever heard of his name, Sir Edward Cook. He was Chief Justice of England 400 years ago. And he was probably the greatest Chief Justice in English history. And among the things that he did, he wrote what turned into be 4 of the amendments of our Bill of Rights. He wrote what became the habeas corpus clause of our Constitution. And although probably only 2 or 3 people in this room ever heard Edward Cook's name, every American over the age of 5 can tell you his most famous ruling from the bench. And that was, the house of everyone is as his castle. And he made that ruling almost exactly 400 years ago. And back then, there were great lords with impregnable castles and private armies. And what he was saying in that ruling was this great lord with his castle on the hill and his private army, when it came to the law, he was no different than some peasant in a mud hut. That before the law, everybody was equal.
Yeah.
Right now, in the state legislature, the industry is saying, wait a second, that doesn't apply to us. We're above the law. You can have laws on the books that are never enforced, and we see to it that they're never enforced because we make sure those regulators can't do their job, because we don't appropriate any money to hire more regulators, because we own the political process to interfere with it. And when somebody actually has the nerve to try to require us in court to obey the law, we're going to kill that lawsuit in the state legislature. It is crazy. And I know you're here to talk about fracking, but believe me, if they can get away with destroying this lawsuit retroactively, what does that mean for your future? So, except we want to save it, we all love our homes. So I ask you, I mean, you lost a fight today in the legislature with the bill, and the Flood Authority lost another round, but we're not dead yet. And I ask you to talk to your legislators, or email them, or call them, or knock on their door, whatever it takes, and tell them to support the lawsuit and let the courts decide that if you expect the industry to be accountable, to keep their word, to honor their contracts, to obey the law, then you better not let them get away with this precedent.
Yeah.
So on that, I thank you very much.